Okay, cool.
Oh, it's done like a pro.
Oh, hi.
See what I found?
Yeah.
You got a haircut.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Here are we inviting right beside.
Yeah, we're inviting people, waiting for more. I'm over.
Following is the saddest. No, because it was like a live demonstration. Everybody was doing it together.
Yeah.
So that was not sad. If anything, that was really good.
I mean, given the means, I have some friends who are working, and they had the same thing, but they sent them a little box.
Let's be honest. We talked about GS stuff last year.
I think there are some.
It is very deprived of cash. But I see your point though. Yeah. If they can afford to do 3 lunches now twice a week, I'm sure they could have sent a teeny tiny box with biscuit fingers. So that's all right.
I mean, I guess that whatever money there was, it's all been burned on the.
I would imagine.
Not completely, because now we have too much.
Well, it's that like a bit of money accumulates in the department, and it's a gambler, just like spends it all.
It's a happy gambling. Let's put it this way. With calorific returns.
Well, a moody gambling, because if you ever miss any of the lunches, I got very, very angry when I couldn't make it to one.
Oh yeah.
And I had booked a ticket.
That's English friends.
Oh, okay. Oh, neat. Looks like there's a delay. But
Yeah,
I think delay is fine.
I mean, the camera is not that good. Can you start this?
I think we have to figure out the reflection. Because I think,
I'm going to put this on my Instagram. So,
Yeah.
Mingchuan, do you want to?
oh, yeah, I can share it on my Instagram.
Yes.
Is it possible to hook up whatever is connected?
No.
Screen into the.
Yeah.
Can you do share screen on this? Can we do share screen?
So that shows up on the TV. Is that what you mean?
No, but the thing is, can't do it because you will read from that.
Oh, right.
So that
Oh,
you
yeah,
don't fill the screen. It's got just show the.
Yes. I think the way he's going to do it is that he's going to share his screen and have his camera on.
We might have to turn these lights off.
Mingchuan. Pose. Do you want to get your slides up as well, just so that you have that
Well,
background?
with
That. Oh yeah, that could work too. If you want to have that on.
Put your slides.
Kind of fancy.
Okay, I'm going to share this link to.
Yeah.
Oh, look at that.
Nice.
Great channel.
Oh, it looks really good.
and wait.
To the pose. The bit. Let's actually look here. Look less sad, more happy.
No, I'm looking intense.
Oh, look at that. That's like such a good photo.
Okay, nice.
That's a very
Oh yeah, it is true. Send it to me.
That's what you have to do for these
Benefit.
sessions. You have to build a media plan.
I think we should actually do that more seriously from.
I think for your publicity officer, but you need to get a committee going.
Can we, yeah, because then I'll invite friends from all over.
I mean,
No. Yeah, I mean, it's up to you, but just don't disturb this.
to
And
be
you
fair, Samsung is the social media platform. So I don't think I can ever out-compete this guy. Come on, man. Just up your game.
I don't always see it.
Okay, shall we start? Are we starting?
Exactly. MCP4G.
Now it's, yeah, should this, okay. So thanks everyone for joining, and we are very, very excited to have them join us. I think this is the first time in the department large meeting room for, and this is a lot of nice people. Some of them get last time. And also,
Yeah.
Mingchuan today is going to present on the paper that was published in 2004
Hmm.
by David like very new word for me, so I don't know much about it. Mingchuan will get the paper and like how it connects to its speed.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks so much. Thank you, Saksham, for this really nice introduction. So now, although the actual title of this work is Tubular Precipitation and Redox Gradients on a Bubbling Template, I'd actually call it Bubble Templated Electrochemical Garden by Stone and Goldstein. So we go. Okay, there is this website I'd like to really recommend. It's known as Connected Papers. It will show the citation networks of papers. It helps to visualize where papers are in their respective fields, and Stone and Goldstein, which is the paper I'm going to bring to you in this talk. I'd also recommend this Barge et al. Paper published on Chem Reviews. It's the first comprehensive review on chemical gardens as a topic. So if you want to get to know more about chemical gardens, I'd recommend that you read this article. Okay, so what are these chemical gardens? First of all, in the community of scholars of chemical gardens, we also interchangeably use another word known as chemobryonics. My take is that chemobryonics is the study of chemical gardens, basically, and chemical gardens are the phenomena that we study. They are self-assembled mineral precipitate enabled by a semi-permeable membrane. They're quite easy to grow, so if you have a spoon of metal salt, such as cobalt chloride, and you immerse it in an aqueous solution of sodium silicate, you get these wonderful shapes that are plant-like. So they are tubular, they self-grow, and they look like plants and are colorful. Now, the general mechanism was established before the paper that I'm gonna recommend. So it's this paper by Julian. Essentially, metal cations, when they meet with the anions in the solution, they would precipitate. This precipitate will develop as colloidal gel, forming an enclosure around the crystal of the metal salt. The gel would act as a semi-permeable membrane, meaning it will be permeable to water, but not as much to metal cation or the anion. Therefore, we will have osmosis of water, which drives continuously drive this growth. Now, so why are people interested in chemical gardens? It's like we tend to think there is a similarity between chemical gardens and biological phenomena. The study of patterns or geometrical patterns or shapes in biological realm is known as morphogenesis. And if we are even bolder, we can consider that there might be a relation between chemical gardens and the origin of life, or alternatively known as abiogenesis. If that is established, we can then think of relationship to astrobiology, meaning the search for extraterrestrial life or potentially growing life on Earth, but in astronomical environments. And of course, there is also the similarity between some geological phenomena, including things like volcano and one particular phenomenon known as hydrothermal vent with chemical gardens. The diagrams on the right-hand side, they are a recent publication by Sean and Julie. Now, it's like they have the reverse approach, essentially. It's like we're trying to find lives, right, on Mars or elsewhere. But what they caution against is that what we tend to think of as fossils of, let's say, bacteria, they might in fact be not lives, but just chemical garden phenomena. So it's the reverse approach to this problem, yeah. There are also other motivations, which include civil engineering applications such as corrosion or semen hydration. There are also attempts to utilize this phenomenon of chemical garden for material science and biomedical applications. I think they are of different materials. So, and the geological materials, meaning they're very likely from certain rocks, so rocky structures, and they're very small. So, unlike the ones I typically deal with, as well as the paper I'm going to present deals with. Okay.
So I think one thing about
Mm.
is that it is also one some sort of origin of life.
Sure. Yeah, that
But after then,
I'd think of origin of life as a subtopic of morphogenesis. But morphogenesis is because it also describes things after the origin of life, right?
yeah, like for example, abiogenesis is origin of life from no life.
Yeah, abiogenesis means the genesis, the establishment, the formation of life from no life, from inorganic materials.
And origin of structures.
Origin of patterns in life phenomena.
So
Yeah, or rather, abiogenesis is a type of morphogenesis. I don't know, but they are interlinked. It's also important that people from chemical gardens, like scholars from this community, they should start using this vocab, morphogenesis. But I don't think this word is used as much at the moment. Okay. Anyway, let me continue to the actual topic of today, which is Stone and Goldstein. So it is an early work of chemical gardens in this century. Although chemical gardens, they have been known for about 4 centuries till now. The first record was by Glauber in the 17th century. I'd like to also mention that Ray, or like Ray Goldstein, is actually a professor here in this university. He's a fellow of Churchill, and interestingly, he won the Ig Nobel Prize in 2012 for modeling ponytail hair. The importance of this work is that they've employed external electrochemical potential. They employed external electrochemical potential into the system and demonstrated a technique from where the would-be future works can be built upon. My personal take is also that it's a rare instance when surface tension effects are in fact discussed. Okay, so the experimental setup is such that we have an aqueous mixture of iron 2 and iron 3 salts of this complicated salt with defined molar ratios. So we have defined ratios of iron 2 and iron 3. I think, okay, it very likely should be water. The reason I did not include oxygen is that in the actual paper there is no oxygen, so very likely it was a mistake in the paper. Yeah, so I intentionally left out the oxygen. We have mild steel cathodes and anodes spaced about 8 centimeters apart, and direct current voltage of 2 to 4 volts. Then hydrolysis of water, because we have electrochemical reaction of involved. So we have hydrolysis of water, which produces hydrogen gas at the cathode. And just to remind you that at the cathode, that's where reduction happens. Then precipitation happens around this cathode, like simultaneously. The hydrogen bubble that is produced from hydrolysis will template this precipitate film. There are also experiments conducted with other conditions, for instance, including no current or just iron 2. The oxidation reaction? I think it will produce. Okay, I need to sort of check again, but I think it's like there will be oxidation, but the most important is still the reduction reaction that happens. Yeah, that is probably where the oxidation happens, because as I will talk about, iron 2 will transition to iron 3 in the process. Okay, so let's just say we form these structures that are tubular, typically with the bubble attached to the end. Now there will with openings, and an observation is that at the boundary from the cathode, the solution is alkaline, but it's a very finite film. Outside, the bulk solution is acidic. If we only have iron 2, then tubes are only produced after many hours from when you apply the electricity. And the ratio of the iron 3 to iron 2 will gradually increase, meaning oxidation gradually happens. If you don't have any current, with just hydrogen gas that you potentially externally produce, there will still be precipitation, but only when you have some additional ammonia gas involved. I will talk about the second figure in some later slides. Yeah. So they look quite Lovecraftian, right? Lovecraftian? Yeah, the creepy kinds of like. Okay, so they also conducted a materials characterization. The main conclusion, so without talking about the actual technical details, is that the iron, the precipitate forms from 3 layers essentially. There is iron oxide, there is iron hydroxide, and there is iron oxyhydroxide in that sort of order. Now, the template in physics essentially surface tension effect in this kind of setup dominates against viscosity, so we'll have a small capillary number. The system obviously exhibits low Reynolds number, meaning it's laminar flow, and advection, or some call it convection, would dominate diffusion, in which case we'll have a large Peclet number.
I think one of the reasons why substitution dominates is because the
Yeah, it's a small length scale, so in that case, surface tension. Yeah. Okay, so the bubbles, when you apply a smaller current, the bubbles, because we'll have less hydrolysis, the bubbles will generally be smaller. They will take longer to detach, and in which case tubes can seal off with decreasing current because bubbles are not strong enough to overcome the strength of the film, where we will end up with figure 2c. So yeah, the creepy eye kind of structure, that is a result of having a lower current. And when you apply a magnetic field, such as in 2D, you'll see this curved kind of shape. What current? Yeah, electrochemical tension. So in which case, electrons will pass from, I can't remember the order, but there will be between the cathode and the anode, right? So it's like you have a setup, you apply an external physics, which is the electric current. You apply that between this cell. That is because there will be a gradient of, I think it's very likely the hydroxide ion around the area of the precipitate, in which case you form different kinds of oxides, I'd say. I think those are quite detailed, so I'd say they did not discuss that in this paper, like in a very detailed manner. But I think they do have that, like as a Porbay diagram, except it's not a complete mathematical description of that. Okay. So the steps are as follows. So the mechanism from where this tubular precipitate are developed. So water and hydrogen ions are reduced at the cathode surface to produce hydroxide and hydrogen, and ammonium are deprotonated to produce ammonia, like gaseous ammonia. We'll have a mixed gas moving as a bubble and act as a mechanical push for the basic solution. When bubbles linger at the tube opening, the basic solution and ammonia react with bulk solution to produce precipitate around the bubble as thin film. So if the bubble is very small, as I said before, this thin film can grow around the surface of that bubble. Then bubble can detach and leave a ring, and green rust transforms into magnetite within tube and oxidizes to nepidocrosite. That is essentially where the layers they originate from. Yeah. Essentially, when you have this extra electrochemical gradient, it will catalyze this whole process, right? But when you don't have it, as in you just have the hydrogen gas and some additional, like externally applied ammonia gas, it will be a slower process, but it still happens. I think it's very similar to that. Yeah, it's just I'm not an electrochemist, but I think there must be some good ways of mapping them together, right? I think bubble it beneath. Yeah. Yeah, because like bubble is sort of a discontinuity. That is where things like nucleation can happen. So that is why you can template it even without this chemical gradient. Yeah. I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But why do they want hydrogen? Like, why do they introduce hydrogen? That is because in corrosions and some geochemical processes, that is what is produced, like naturally. So you have those hydrogen, even though it's a very slow process, but you need to consider that into your picture. We'll have hydrogen, and that is probably why they must have this in their experiments. Their motivation is mainly, to be honest, to study this and try to map this with corrosion problems. And also, by the time these people carried out this experiments for this paper, they obviously did not refer to their setup as chemical gardens, and they very likely did not have the morphogenesis aspects in mind, at least for this paper. So they also carried out some experiments involving a gel system. So instead of the discrete kind of system, they had a gel, in which case they can study this problem in a much more controlled fashion. It is a complicated system that consists of diffusion, advection, precipitation. Therefore, it is natural to seek a simplified physics, which gel systems offer. And therein they made similarities between their gel system and studies of Turing patterns in reaction diffusion systems. I'm not sure, but I think section is very interesting in this, right? Like Turing pattern. I think it's just that when you have certain frequencies, as in when there are periodic occurrences, that's probably where the similarity occurs. They have Porbet diagrams mapped against, not sure how to pronounce, but there is a mapping between the Porbet diagram and the pattern that you can visually observe. And they also conducted some experiments in the reverse phase manner, as in they had the geometry upside down. This is such that they can map this type of experiment with soda straw that we can see in caves, right? It's just a way to describe the soda straw. So yeah, the same kind of thing, except you do it the other way around, right? Yeah, it we will go down. Yeah, two. Yeah, two. So that is very likely the bubble. So this bit is the bubble. This bit is the same kind of precipitate structure that you see from the previous images. Yeah. I think yeah, that is actually probably the reason this is not a very long tube. Yeah, because bubbles obviously wants to go up. Yeah, very likely, very likely. So it's like the precipitate structure, when it grows, it probably is stopped by this hydrogen gas, because hydrogen gas wants to go up, or at least slow down by the hydrogen gas. But I have to say this bit is not the primary focus of the study. Like the primary focus is still the bits before, yeah, like these stuffs. Okay, like my personal take on this paper is that, first of all, it's an early work of chemical gardens in this century that had paved ways for many would-be future research. Essentially, they added this physics of electrochemical potential into a chemobryonic system. There could be ways other than what they had already presented to study the phenomena involved in more controllable fashion. As I said, it's a very complicated physiochemical system, right? So it's only natural to think of ways to make it simpler so that you can see the individual elements of effects at play. If I'd say, okay, what I propose is like, it would be really interesting if the experiments involved can be studied in confined geometries, such as helical cells or microfluidic devices. I think some of that had undoubtedly been carried out, but more works are to be done, right? And the most important is that they really talked about surface tension, which is obvious because they have bubbles. But typically for scholars of chemical gardens, this language, this word, surface tension, is often overlooked. People typically don't talk about surface tension. Probably because most scholars of chemical gardens are chemists, so they probably don't look at problems from that perspective, from the physio, or rather fluid dynamics point of view. Like surface tension is sort of a fluid mechanics / thermodynamics language. No, so yeah, like most chemical gardens do not require this gas or like the external electrical chemical gradient. Yeah, as in if you just have cobalt chloride solid in sodium silicate, it will grow in your chemical garden. You don't need electricity. You don't need gas. But when you add some gas, such that you potentially can control that gas bubble, you can shape this chemical garden yourself, meaning you don't let it do the self-assembling stuff. You do it in sort of an artificial way. The same goes for electrochemical gradient. what it does is that you can make things more controllable and you can potentially speed up this process. Some processes, okay, they are not actually that slow, but I'd definitely say they're not fast. They typically take something like 3 hours, or some of them are even longer. And I think there was this very interesting, not sure whether it's in this network, but there used to be a paper that deals with chemical garden in like a microgravity situation in the International Space Station. In which case the process of growth is very slow, and in a really different manner from what we have here on Earth. The interface with the bubble, I think it's with water, but or rather with the aqueous solution around it, right? But if that water is sort of not moving, I guess it does not have enough strength, then the precipitate can grow around it and completely seal it off, such as the eye. In natural environments. In corrosion, yes, I think, as I said, a major motivation for these people to study what they did was to see corrosion. And yeah, you see these stuffs like, say, on pipes, you see those iron little tubes, and some of them are curved, right? Except they might not be that long, but you can still see them. I guess this is a way, in which case you apply some external electrochemical gradient to speed it up, to see the effects that should be long term, but you can see them immediately, right? Hmm. I'd say my personal take on that is, for instance, the Porbay diagram. If we go here, my understanding of electrochemical, like the general approach, is that it's mostly equilibrium that people talk about. But is that the correct approach? It's like my understanding is that things like mass transfer, like diffusion, right, or heat transfer, like conduction, or fluid dynamics, they are by definition not at equilibrium. And often people will make mistake when they do not distinguish between the two types. Yeah, in short time scale or length scale, you can very likely say it's at equilibrium. You can approximate it as such, but yeah. I think you're talking about this diagram. Yeah. Except it's studied in a way that is probably not like this. Okay, I'm not an expert on this, so yeah, pH versus, so that is time. I guess time as in frequency, as in yeah, yeah. Mm. I think the T here is mapped to the spatial coordinate. Therefore, this is sort of spatially mapped. And I appreciate what you've been saying. Like, for instance, for such a phenomenon, it would be really nice if we can detect the local concentrations, right? They did some of that, as I said before. Is like they concluded that where is it? Yeah, so the boundary from that cathode is basic, but the bulk solution is acidic. They concluded that, but it's like if we want to study this local thing, we need to take sample from there at the correct time and correct location, which can be quite difficult. Yeah. I'd say I guess the reason these people are interested in the mass is so that you can avoid doing the spectroscopy, right? As you said, it's expensive. Mm. Now, I think if anything, it's like the setup, which is 3D in this problem, in this paper, makes it difficult to do spectroscopy. I think like spectroscopic imaging. But if we can have hydrocell or microfluidic devices, we can do imaging, right? As in, you spatially scan the entire thing at some very short time, so that you can produce an image of the distribution of concentrations. But I'd say if you have this 3D, it's probably difficult. Yeah, or microfluidic device, which is very small, very limited in space, right? Okay, so lastly, I'd like to say, okay, some of the current works in my group. So we experimentally grow chemical gardens in horizontal or vertical hydrol cell by pellet or injection. And one specific interest is explosive rupture of that chemical garden. We also do mathematical modeling, things like continuity, Navier-Stokes, etc. It's like rupture is a phenomenon that we observe for certain setups, particularly to do with the pellet technique. I can talk about that in more details, but yeah, we study that because it's a phenomenon that can be studied controllably. Well, I imagine if the pellet thing, the pellet garden is somehow similar to certain biological beings, the moment it ruptures means it cannot sustain itself anymore, right? Yeah, death, death. It's just like, bacteria, for instance. The reason they are killed with alcohol, for instance, is because they cannot sustain the osmotic pressure. The materials inside them are water, right? It will try to go out. I mean, it will exert a pressure that they cannot withstand. Yeah, so if there is any similarity between the chemical garden membrane and a live membrane, yeah, like human cells, like bacteria, And some of the plant works, we'd like to explore effects of viscosity, density, and most importantly, surface tension. As I said, stuff like that are not talked a lot about by chemical gardens. We'd like to experimentally grow chemical gardens in microfluidic devices. We'd like to conduct CFD simulations. And lastly, we'd like to see the relation between chemical gardens and certain geological phenomena, such as volcanoes, soda straws, manganese nodules, and the interaction with biological activities. My favorite? I'd say it's manganese nodule because I sort of came up with it. But last time I checked, there are some leftover works about lava. Yeah, there are some leftover works that are not finished. And as in, like, oh, I think chemical garden is just one particular case of morphogenesis study, right? That involves certain membranes that are not permeable to all species. To all species, meaning it's semi-permeable. In the case here, right, it's the precipitate. Yeah, and there might be chemical gradients, chemical concentration, as in potential gradients. What membrane in morphogens? Okay. Oh, they don't like. Okay, yeah. Well, it's. They can talk about things like leaves, so they can see things from a really macroscopic point of view. But yeah, duplication cell, for instance. I'd say, yeah, it's an attempt subset. Yeah. Whether I think that's a reasonable comparison is like we don't really know the answer yet. If it is yes, then, well, wonderful. If it's not, then we sort of need to know why. I haven't come across good reason against this approach. Like oh, there are. Yeah, they look like corals. Last time we had the coral reef journal club. It's like, no, the reason people might be interested in this is that unless you believe in some sort of an artificial creation, yeah, unless you believe in that, I'd say although life is organic by nature, at the very bottom end, it should be inorganic. Carbon, for instance, diamond, that is inorganic. Methane is the simplest organic structure you can get, but it has properties that look more inorganic than organic.
I think there is one thing that I can see in the next 50 years emergence of like
Yeah, geometric emergence, the mathematical abstract kind of description, right?
because, for example, the way organisms or plants would work, and the they start from single cell, and then the single cell is fold, and the liquid fold, like the single cell is fold to form multiple cells, and then they grow in some sort of pattern.
Some sort of pattern, yeah.
No, no,
Yeah, well, maybe the Turing pattern.
and then, yeah, and then like the pattern which is developing always has some map of a certain so after let's say 7 or 8 9 months, the baby is going to work with its head here, tail here, then there's going to be an indication of head and tail. So this is the geometry. The geometry of this stays the same. It develops, but there is some hardness that issues with the development. For plants, but in this case also, I mean, I don't know how it develops. I mean, geometrically,
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you, Kate. Thank you so much for coming. Shall we stop the presentation?
So thanks. I will just say. So thanks a lot for coming.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming.
I'm so happy to listen to Mingchuan's presentation covering all the aspects of life.
Yeah, like even if it cannot explain life, it's still something worth investigating, I'd say.